In this powerful story, two lifelong friends, one a respected police captain, the other a passionate defense attorney, face a life-altering moment when a routine traffic stop exposes deep flaws in the justice system. Their fight for reform takes them from local tensions to a national stage, testing their friendship, values, and their roles in the world they've sworn to protect. What happens when those who uphold the law must confront its failures? Subscribe for more stories that inspire and challenge, and let us know in the comment. Would you handle a moment of truth like theirs? Let's jump into the story. It was a crisp autumn evening in the heart of Denver, Colorado, where the skyline glimmered against the dark sky. The city had a pulse tonight, vibrating with energy after an event celebrating Black professionals and their impact on the community. Ryan Carter, a 35-year-old police captain, drove quietly through the city's busy streets. His best friend, Jordan Thompson, sat beside him, leaning back with a contented sigh. "Man, that was something, wasn't it?" Jordan remarked, his voice filled with satisfaction. As a successful defense attorney, Jordan was no stranger to public speaking, but tonight had been special. He and Ryan had shared the stage, addressing young, aspiring professionals about resilience, success, and the importance of giving back to the community. Ryan smiled, nodding slightly. "Yeah, it felt good. The turnout was incredible." Jordan chuckled. "You see that kid at the end? The one who couldn't stop asking questions? You think he'll be a future lawyer or a cop?" "Definitely a lawyer," Ryan joked. "He was already grilling me." The two men shared a laugh, the warmth of their camaraderie easing the quiet of the night. The event had been a success, and they were both proud of what they had accomplished. Ryan was especially gratified, knowing that his leadership role within the police force had helped bridge some of the divide between law enforcement and the Black community in the city. But even as the glow of the evening lingered, there was always an undercurrent of unease for Ryan Waite that came with being both Black and a police officer in a world that didn't always see those identities as compatible. The streets had thinned out as Ryan and Jordan left downtown. The traffic was light, the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze, the only sounds breaking the silence. Ryan drove with ease, hands resting on the wheel, his mind replaying moments from the night. Then, out of nowhere, blue and red lights flashed in his rearview mirror. Ryan's stomach sank. His first instinct was to check the speedometer. He wasn't speeding. There hadn't been any swerving or erratic driving. He glanced at Jordan, whose brow furrowed in confusion. "Why are they pulling us over?" Jordan asked, his tone reflecting the same unease Ryan felt. "I don't know," Ryan replied, pulling the car to the side of the road. He exhaled slowly, preparing himself for what was to come. This wasn't the first time he'd been pulled over for no apparent reason, and as much as he hated it, he knew how these situations could escalate. As the police car rolled to a stop behind them, Ryan kept his hands visible on the steering wheel. He glanced at Jordan, who was sitting tensely. "Stay calm," Ryan said quietly, though he felt the familiar churn of anxiety starting in his gut. Two officers approached the vehicle, their silhouettes dark against the flashing lights. One, the younger of the two, stepped up to Ryan's window with an air of authority that was unnerving. "License and registration," the officer barked, without any greeting or explanation. His face was cold, his posture rigid. Ryan gave a quick, calm nod, his hand still on the wheel. "Sure thing, officer," he said, his voice even. He reached slowly for his wallet and handed over his ID along with the car registration. Despite his calm demeanor, the tension was already creeping up his spine. The officer barely glanced at the documents before his eyes shifted toward Jordan. "You too," he snapped, indicating that Jordan needed to hand over his ID as well. Jordan hesitated for a second, a frown creasing his forehead. "What's the problem?" he asked, his voice edged with suspicion. The officer didn't answer, just stared him down until Jordan finally handed over his ID with a slow, deliberate motion. There was something in the air, an unspoken hostility that neither man could ignore. Ryan's instincts told him this wasn't a routine stop. He could feel it in the way the officers carried themselves, in their clipped words and aggressive stances. He had been on the other side of stops like this before, but now he was just another Black man being scrutinized on the side of the road. The officer took their IDs and walked back to the patrol car with his partner, leaving Ryan and Jordan in an uncomfortable silence. The glow of the police lights cast eerie shadows across their faces. "This doesn't feel right, man," Jordan muttered, shaking his head. His hands drummed lightly on his legs, a nervous habit. Ryan agreed silently but kept his face neutral. His years on the force had taught him how to mask emotions in tense situations, but he couldn't shake the sinking feeling in his gut. He had done nothing wrong, yet here they were, waiting under suspicion. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. Cars slowed as they passed, curious eyes peering through windshields, and the situation began to feel surreal. The quiet night had suddenly become heavy with anticipation, and neither Ryan nor Jordan knew what would happen next. Finally, the officers returned. The younger one, Officer Matt Barnes, had a hard look on his face, while the other, Officer Jake Foster, seemed to hang back, observing but silent. "Step out of the vehicle," Barnes ordered, his hand resting ominously on the butt of his holstered gun. Ryan's stomach tightened, but he maintained his calm. "Officer, can you explain why we were pulled over?" he asked, his voice measured. "You're acting suspiciously," Barnes shot back, his tone flat, dismissive. Ryan felt his patience slipping, but he didn't argue. He knew better. Beside him, Jordan was seething, but a glance from Ryan kept him quiet for now. With slow, deliberate movements, both Ryan and Jordan exited the car. Barnes wasted no time slapping handcuffs on Ryan's wrists, while Foster did the same to Jordan. The humiliation hit hard, the cold metal biting into Ryan's skin as the officers led them to the side of the road. Standing in the harsh light of the patrol car, Ryan felt the sting of every passing glance. To the people driving by, this was just another scene of two black men being detained by the police. No one knew Ryan's rank. No one knew Jordan was a successful attorney. To the outside world, they were suspects. Jordan couldn't hold back any longer. "This is ridiculous. We haven't done anything wrong," he protested, his voice rising in anger. "You're profiling us, plain and simple." Barnes shot him a cold look, but said nothing, tightening the cuffs on Jordan's wrists. Foster still stood back, his eyes darting nervously between his partner and the two men in cuffs. Ryan's mind raced. Should he say something, reveal his identity? Part of him wanted to end this farce immediately, but another part of him wanted to see it through, wanted to expose the deep-seated prejudice for what it was. Minutes passed like hours, the tension unbearable. Then suddenly something shifted. Foster, the quieter of the two officers, walked back to the patrol car to run their IDs. The glow of the computer screen illuminated his face, and when the results flashed across the monitor, his expression changed. Foster's eyes widened in shock as he read the information. He turned sharply toward Ryan, recognition dawning in his eyes. His heart pounded as he took in the gravity of the situation. Ryan Carter wasn't just any man. He was their superior. Foster rushed back to Barnes, who was still standing over the two handcuffed men. "Do you know who that is?" Foster whispered urgently. Barnes looked confused, his grip tightening on his flashlight. "Who cares? They fit the description," he muttered. "That's Captain Ryan Carter," Foster hissed. "As a high-ranking officer, our superior." The color drained from Barnes' face. He froze for a moment, his mind racing as the reality of their mistake hit him like a freight train. His eyes darted between Ryan and Jordan, then back to Foster. Without wasting another second, the two officers fumbled to unlock the handcuffs, their earlier confidence evaporating into the night air. We didn't know, sir," Foster stammered as he removed Ryan's cuffs. "There's been a misunderstanding." Ryan, now free, rubbed his wrists and looked at the officers with a calm, piercing gaze. His disappointment was palpable, cutting through the air more sharply than any angry outburst could have. "That's the problem," Ryan said quietly, his voice steady but filled with authority. "You didn't ask." Barnes stood there, speechless, his face reflecting the weight of what they had just done. Jordan, now uncuffed as well, stepped forward, his eyes blazing with anger. "If this is how you treat him," Jordan said, nodding toward Ryan, "how do you treat the rest of us?" The backup officers, who had arrived moments earlier, stood awkwardly in the background. Their initial readiness for confrontation now turned into discomfort. They had come expecting trouble, but what they found instead was the brutal truth that they had nearly arrested one of their own leaders based on nothing but an assumption. Ryan and Jordan turned and walked back to their car. Before getting in, Ryan paused and looked over his shoulder at the officers, who were still frozen in their guilt. "You need to think about why you treated us like this," Ryan said, his voice firm but controlled. "This isn't just about me. It's about every person who's judged before they're even heard." With that, Ryan and Jordan got into the car and drove off, leaving the officers standing in stunned silence, the flashing lights still casting long shadows across the empty street. The city lights blurred as Ryan and Jordan drove away from the scene in silence. The hum of the car's engine did little to calm the tension that hung between them. Ryan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw clenched. Jordan sat back, staring out of the window, still fuming from the encounter. Man, can you believe that Jordan finally broke the silence, his voice tinged with frustration. That could have gone so much worse. Ryan didn't respond immediately. He was still processing the night's events, the shame of being handcuffed, the weight of his position, and the realization that his status meant nothing in the eyes of those officers. Jordan continued, his anger building again. "What if you weren't Captain Ryan Carter? What if you were just some random guy? They weren't going to let us go until they figured out who you were." Ryan finally spoke, his voice low. "That's the part that keeps bothering me." Jordan turned to him, his eyes flashing with righteous indignation. "It's not just you, man. This is happening every day, to people who don't have the power or the rank to make those guys think twice." Ryan nodded. He knew Jordan was right. As a police captain, he had spent years navigating the complicated relationship between his black identity and his role in law enforcement. He'd always believed in using his position to make change from the inside, but tonight had shaken him. Maybe he hadn't done enough. Maybe his silence, his attempts to play by the rules, had allowed the system to remain broken. The rest of the drive was quiet. Ryan's mind swirled with thoughts of the department, his colleagues, and the countless incidents of racial profiling that went unreported or ignored. This couldn't just be swept under the rug. Not this time. The next morning, Ryan sat at his kitchen table, a cup of coffee in his hands, staring blankly at the newspaper in front of him. The headlines had nothing to do with the night before, but his mind was elsewhere. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was Jordan. "You ready for today?" Jordan asked without preamble. Ryan sighed. He had been dreading this conversation. "Yeah, I'll be at the station soon. You going to say anything you should?" Ryan hesitated. "I don't know. I have to be careful. If I make this a big deal, it could hurt my career." Jordan's voice hardened. "Man, screw your career for a second. This is bigger than you. You have a platform that most people don't. Don't let them brush this under the rug." Ryan leaned back, rubbing his temples. He knew Jordan was right, but the consequences of speaking out could be huge. His position was secure now, but that could change if he made too much noise. He had seen it happen before. "I'll handle it," Ryan said finally. "I just need to figure out the right way." Jordan sighed. "Just don't stay quiet. That's what they're counting on." Ryan ended the call and stared at his reflection in the window. He had spent years rising through the ranks of the department, believing that change could come from within. Now he wasn't so sure. Something had to give. When Ryan arrived at the precinct, he felt the shift in the air immediately. His colleagues, people he had known for years, were acting differently. Some gave him tight, uncomfortable smiles. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Word of the incident had already spread, and whispers trailed behind him as he walked through the halls. He entered his office and closed the door, leaning against it for a moment. He needed to gather his thoughts. But before he could, there was a knock. "Come in," he called. The door opened to reveal Chief Tom Harris, a grizzled veteran who had been Ryan's mentor since he first joined the force. Harris stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Ryan," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "I heard about what happened last night." Ryan nodded, his face carefully neutral. "Yeah, it was something." Harris frowned. "Look, I know this isn't the first time we've had an issue like this, but we can't afford to have this turn into a media circus. Those officers, Barnes and Foster, there being dealt with internally." Ryan's stomach tightened. Dealt with. They handcuffed me for no reason. If I wasn't who I am, how far would that have gone? The chief sighed, leaning against the desk. I understand. Believe me, I do. But you know how things work around here. If you push too hard, it'll become a bigger problem than it already is. I need you to trust me to handle this. Ryan's anger flared, but he held it in check. Handle it how? Like the other times something like this happened. Harris looked uncomfortable. You've done a lot of good here, Ryan. We can't afford to lose you. Just let me deal with it. Quietly. Ryan stood, his posture tense. I'm not staying quiet about this, Chief. I'm not asking for special treatment because I'm a captain. I'm asking for accountability. Harris held Ryan's gaze for a long moment before he nodded reluctantly. I'll do what I can. But be careful, Ryan. You know how quickly things can turn in this department. As the chief left, Ryan sat back down at his desk, frustration gnawing at him. He had spent years earning his place, fighting against the silent prejudices that followed him at every turn. But now, for the first time, he was starting to realize that maybe the system he had been protecting wasn't worth defending. While Ryan wrestled with his internal conflict, Jordan took matters into his own hands. As a defense attorney, he had seen too many cases where black men were targeted by police, where their voices were drowned out by a system that didn't care. He wasn't going to let Ryan's incident fade into the background. Jordan began gathering evidence, not just about Ryan's case, but other cases of racial profiling within the city. He had heard whispers for years, but now he was determined to expose the truth. His first stop was the Civil Rights Advocacy Group, a local organization that fought against police misconduct. The office was small, but bustling with energy. Jordan met with Samantha Lewis, a passionate attorney who had dedicated her career to fighting for justice. I need your help, Jordan said, as they sat down in her cluttered office. This isn't just about one case. This is a pattern. We need to shine a light on it. Samantha nodded, her face serious. We've been building a case for years, but we've never had someone with Ryan's position willing to speak up. If he's in, this could be huge. Jordan leaned forward. Hell be in. He just needs a push. And once we start this, we can't stop. We have to go all the way. Samantha smiled grimly. Don't worry. I don't plan on stopping. Together, they began building a legal strategy, preparing to bring the fight to the department. But Jordan knew the hardest part would be convincing Ryan to join them publicly. Ryan had always been measured, careful not to make waves. This time, though, Jordan was going to make sure he didn't stay silent. Days passed, and the weight of what had happened hung over Ryan like a storm cloud. The officers involved had been placed on temporary suspension, but that wasn't enough. It didn't fix the underlying issue. Ryan had tried to focus on his work, but every time he walked through the precinct, he could feel the eyes on him, the unspoken judgments. One evening, after a particularly long day, Ryan found himself at Jordan's apartment. The two men sat on the balcony, the city stretching out beneath them. You know, you can't just let this go, Jordan said, breaking the silence. If you do, nothing will ever change. Ryan sighed. I know. But it's complicated. If I speak out, I could lose everything I've worked for. My career, my reputation. Jordan leaned forward, his eyes intense. And what about the people who don't have that choice? What about the ones who get pulled over and don't have a captain's badge to flash? They're losing their lives, man. You can't stay quiet. Ryan stared out at the city, the words weighing heavily on him. He had always believed in making change from within the system, but now he wasn't sure that was enough. Maybe Jordan was right. Maybe it was time to make some noise. I'm with you, Ryan said finally, his voice quiet but resolute. Let's do this. The next day, Ryan made the decision to join Jordan and Samantha in their fight. He was done staying quiet. This wasn't just about him. This was about a broken system that needed to be exposed. Together, they began preparing for a public hearing, one that would bring the issue of racial profiling in the department to light. As the news spread, the tension in the department escalated. Some officers supported Ryan's decision, quietly offering their solidarity. Others, like Officer Barnes and his allies, resented him, seeing his actions as a betrayal. Ryan knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But for the first time he felt a sense of clarity. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for everyone who had been treated unfairly, for everyone who had been silenced. The battle was just beginning, but Ryan was ready. The city buzzed with anticipation as news of Ryan's decision to speak out spread. Social media lit up with discussions about racial profiling and police misconduct, with many eagerly awaiting the upcoming public hearing. For weeks, the tension had been building, and now the moment was almost here. Ryan felt the weight of it all on his shoulders. His days at the precinct had become a balancing act. Many officers remained professional, but he could feel the cracks in their trust. A few of his superiors, including Chief Harris, tried to talk him out of going forward, warning him about the damage this could do to his career. But Ryan was past the point of turning back. Everywhere he went, people had something to say. Some approached him with support, others with thinly veiled hostility. The black community especially saw him as a hero for taking a stand. But it wasn't easy. Ryan had worked for years to gain respect in a profession that was often hostile toward people who looked like him. Now he was risking it all. Jordan, on the other hand, thrived in the storm. As the public face of their case, he was eloquent, fiery, and relentless. He had conducted interviews, presented evidence, and worked tirelessly with Samantha to make sure they had everything they needed for the hearing. "We're ready," Jordan said one evening, looking over stacks of documents. "We've got the data, we've got witnesses, and we've got public opinion on our side. This is bigger than just one incident now." Ryan nodded, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. He knew they had done the work, but he also knew how these things could go. Public opinion could shift at any moment, and the department was powerful. He couldn't shake the fear that they might be in over their heads. "I hope you're right," Ryan said quietly. "I know I'm right," Jordan replied with his usual confidence. "And once this hearing happens, things are going to change." The day of the hearing arrived, and the tension in the air was palpable. The hearing room was packed with reporters, community members, and police officers. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for the fireworks to begin. Ryan sat at the front of the room, feeling the weight of the eyes on him. Jordan and Samantha flanked him, their expressions calm and determined. Across the room, Officer Barnes and Officer Foster sat with their legal team, looking uncomfortable but defiant. Chief Harris sat in the back, his expression hard to read. Ryan had always respected Harris, but their relationship had been strained ever since Ryan had decided to go public with the case. As the hearing began, the panel of city officials overseeing the case called witnesses one by one. Jordan and Samantha had meticulously prepared a case that went beyond Ryan's own experience, showing a pattern of racial profiling within the department. They presented data, statistics, and testimony from other victims who had been pulled over, detained, or harassed without cause. The emotional intensity in the room rose with each testimony. A black mother tearfully recounted how her teenage son had been wrongfully arrested after being stopped on his way home from school. A young man described being frisked and detained for walking through a predominantly white neighborhood. Each story added fuel to the fire, painting a damning picture of the department's practices. When it was finally Ryan's turn to speak, the room went silent. Ryan took a deep breath and stood up. His hands trembled slightly, but he steadied himself. He had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but now that it was here, the reality of it all felt overwhelming. He wasn't just speaking for himself anymore, he was speaking for all the people who had been mistreated, ignored, or silenced. "My name is Ryan Carter," he began, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "I've been a police officer for over a decade. And for most of that time, I believed in the system. I believed that if I worked hard, if I followed the rules, I could make a difference. That I could change things from the inside." He paused, looking around the room, meeting the eyes of those who had come to listen. "But last month, something happened that made me realize I've been fooling myself. I was pulled over, handcuffed, and treated like a criminal by my own officers because of the color of my skin. And I'm not the only one. This happens every day to people who don't have the privilege of a badge or a title to protect them." Ryan's voice grew stronger as he continued, the passion in his words undeniable. The problem isn't just a few bad officers. It's a system that allows them to operate this way without accountability. And that has to change. The room was silent as Ryan finished his testimony, the weight of his words hanging in the air. He had laid bare the truth, and now it was up to the panel to decide what to do with it. The hearing had made waves, but the battle was far from over. In the days that followed, the department faced intense scrutiny. Protests erupted across the city, with people demanding justice and reform. Social media was ablaze with the hashtag #StandWithRyan, as people rallied behind his cause. But the backlash within the department was swift and brutal. Ryan found himself isolated at work. Officers who had once been his friends now avoided him. Some even openly criticized him, accusing him of betraying the department and playing into a political agenda. The tension at the precinct was thick, and every day felt like a test of endurance. Officer Barnes, now suspended pending further investigation, became a lightning rod for the anger simmering within the force. Rumors spread that he and his supporters were planning to retaliate against Ryan, though nothing concrete had emerged. Ryan knew the department would never be the same again, for better or worse. But he also knew that this fight was bigger than his own career. He had committed to exposing the truth, and he wasn't going to back down now. As the pressure mounted, the once unbreakable bond between Ryan and Jordan began to fray. Jordan, ever the fighter, wanted to push harder, demand more. He wanted to take the case to federal court, push for nationwide police reform, and make sure the department couldn't sweep anything under the rug. But Ryan, who had spent his life walking the line between law enforcement and the community, wasn't sure how far he was willing to go. His career was already hanging by a thread, and the stress of being in the spotlight was taking its toll. One evening, after another grueling day at the precinct, Ryan and Jordan sat down to talk. The tension between them was thick, and it wasn't long before their conversation turned into an argument. "You've got to keep pushing," Jordan insisted, his voice rising. "We've got momentum. People are listening. We can't let this go." Ryan shook his head, his expression weary. "You don't get it, man. You're not in the department. You don't see what's happening from the inside. I'm not just fighting a legal battle. I'm fighting to stay afloat every day." Jordan's eyes flashed with frustration. "So, what, you're just going to let them win, let them bury you and move on?" Ryan stood up, his temper flaring. "It's not that simple. I've given my life to this job. I've worked harder than anyone to get where I am. I can't just burn it all down." Jordan shook his head, disbelief written across his face. "You think this is just about you? This is about all of us. If you back down now, they'll keep doing it. To you, to me, to every black man who gets pulled over for no reason." Ryan's shoulders slumped as the weight of Jordan's words hit him. He knew his friend was right, but the fear of losing everything he had worked for still loomed large. The argument ended in silence, both men staring at each other across the divide that had opened between them. Neither was willing to back down, but neither wanted to lose their friendship over it either. In the weeks following the hearing, change began to take root. The public pressure had forced the city to act, and new policies were introduced to address racial profiling within the police department. Officer Barnes was officially dismissed, and an independent oversight board was created to investigate complaints against the police. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was a start. Ryan, though still facing tension at the precinct, found renewed purpose in his role. He began working with community leaders to develop training programs for officers, focusing on de-escalation and implicit bias. His work wasn't glamorous, and it didn't grab headlines like the hearing had, but it was real, and it was making a difference. Jordan, though disappointed that Ryan hadn't pushed harder, respected his friend's decision. He continued to work with civil rights organizations, using his legal skills to fight for justice in the courtroom. The rift between them slowly began to heal, and while they didn't always agree on the best way forward, they were united in their goal of making the world a better place. Months after the hearing, Ryan stood in front of a group of young, newly minted officers at the police academy. He had been invited to speak about his experiences, and as he looked out at their eager faces, he felt a sense of hope. "Being a police officer is about more than enforcing the law," Ryan began. It's about serving your community. It's about understanding the people you're supposed to protect. And it's about holding yourself to the highest standard, because if you don't, no one else will. The room was silent as Ryan spoke, his words carrying the weight of his journey. In this job, you'll face choices that test your character. You'll be asked to make split-second decisions that could change someone's life. And when that happens, you need to ask yourself, am I doing this because it's right or because it's easy? Ryan paused, letting the words sink in. The system isn't perfect. It's far from it. But you have the power to be part of the solution. And that starts with how you treat people, no matter who they are. As Ryan finished his speech, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight for justice wasn't over, but he had made his choice. He would continue to fight from within, using his position to make the system better, step by step. And as he left the academy that day, Ryan knew that the journey ahead would be long. But he was ready. In the months that followed the hearing, the department began to change slowly, but surely. The reforms introduced weren't just cosmetic. They were real steps toward addressing the deep-rooted issues that had led to incidents like Ryan's. A new police oversight committee had been formed, tasked with investigating cases of misconduct and ensuring accountability. While there were those within the department who resisted these changes, the public support and pressure made it impossible for the leadership to ignore. Ryan threw himself into the work. He collaborated with community leaders, activists, and fellow officers who were committed to making a difference. His role evolved from simply enforcing the law to becoming an advocate for a fairer, more just police force. He took part in developing new training programs that focused on de-escalation, bias recognition, and community engagement. These programs were designed to prevent the kind of racial profiling that had nearly cost him everything. One day, after leading a seminar on racial bias for new recruits, Ryan sat in his office reflecting on how far things had come. Despite the progress, he knew the road ahead was still long. The culture within law enforcement didn't change overnight, but for the first time in a long time he felt hope. The work he was doing wasn't just about fixing the department, it was about building a future where men like him and Jordan wouldn't have to constantly look over their shoulders. As Ryan packed up his things to head home, he received a text from Jordan Drinks at the usual spot.
Ryan smiled.
It had been a while since they had a chance to unwind together. With all the changes happening, their friendship had become a source of strength for both of them, despite their occasional disagreements about the pace of progress. On my way, Ryan texted back. Ryan and Jordan met at their favorite bar, a cozy spot nestled in a quiet neighborhood. It was the kind of place where they could sit for hours, talking about everything and nothing. As Ryan walked in, he saw Jordan already seated at their usual booth, nursing a beer. "Hey, man," Ryan said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Hey," Jordan replied, raising his glass. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about your old friend." Ryan chuckled. "You know how it is. They've got me running all these training sessions now." Jordan smirked. "The hero of the people, huh? Guess that makes me the sidekick." "More like the guy who keeps the hero in check," Ryan replied, grinning. They clinked their glasses together, but there was an unspoken tension between them. Despite everything they had accomplished, there were still lingering disagreements about how far they should push for change. Jordan had always been the more aggressive of the two, ready to take on the system with both fists swinging. Ryan, meanwhile, preferred a more measured approach. "So," Jordan said, leaning back in his seat, "how's the reform project going? You think it's enough?" Ryan took a sip of his beer before answering. "It's a start. We're making progress, but it's going to take time. This isn't something we can fix overnight." Jordan's expression tightened. "Yeah, but what happens in the meantime? What about the people who don't have time to wait for things to change? You're doing good work, Ryan, but it's slow. And in the meantime, people are still getting hurt." Ryan nodded, understanding Jordan's frustration. "I get it, man. I really do. But we have to be smart about this. If we push too hard, too fast, we risk alienating the people we need on our side. We've already seen some officers push back. We need them to buy into the change, not fight against it." Jordan looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. "I just don't want to see us lose momentum, you know?" The hearing was a big deal. People are paying attention now. If we don't keep pushing, things could go right back to the way they were." Ryan leaned forward, his tone serious. "That's not going to happen. I won't let it. We're in this for the long haul. And that means we have to be strategic." Jordan took a deep breath and nodded. "I hear you. I just don't want us to lose sight of what we're fighting for." "We won't," Ryan assured him. "We're in this together." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, and for the rest of the evening they talked and laughed like old times. But beneath the surface, they both knew the fight was far from over. While Ryan and Jordan focused on reform, the department was forced to reckon with the actions of officers like Matt Barnes and Jake Foster. Barnes had been officially dismissed from the force following the public hearing, his career effectively over. Foster, who had played a less direct role, was suspended and reassigned to a desk job. But the case didn't end there. Officer Riley, the younger officer who had been at the heart of the incident that started it all, had been quietly placed under review. Unlike Barnes, Riley wasn't outright dismissed, but his future with the department was uncertain. Ryan hadn't had any direct interactions with Riley since the night of the traffic stop, but he knew that the fallout had been significant for the young officer. One afternoon, after a meeting with the Oversight Committee, Ryan was surprised to find Riley waiting for him outside the precinct. "Captain Carter," Riley said, his voice tentative. Ryan paused, regarding the younger officer with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "What can I do for you, Officer Riley?" Riley shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted to talk to you about what happened." Ryan crossed his arms, his expression guarded. "Go ahead." Riley took a deep breath. I wanted to apologize. For that night. I know I messed up. I should have known who you were, but more than that, I shouldn't have treated you like I did. I let my assumptions get the better of me, and I've been paying for it ever since." Ryan studied Riley for a moment, unsure of what to say. Part of him wanted to forgive the young officer, to see this as a sign that change was possible. But another part of him was still angry that it had taken something so personal for Riley to see the truth. "Apology accepted," Ryan said finally. "But this isn't about me. This is about everyone who gets stopped, searched, and harassed because of assumptions. You need to think about how you're going to change that, not just for me, but for every person you come across in this job." Riley nodded, his face serious. "I understand. I'm trying to do better." Ryan gave him a small nod. "That's all anyone can ask for. Just remember, you have a responsibility. Don't waste it." As Riley walked away, Ryan felt a strange sense of closure. The journey wasn't over, but this moment, this small step was a sign that things could change. Months after the hearing, the momentum for reform continued to grow. The police department, under pressure from both the public and city officials, implemented a series of new policies aimed at addressing racial profiling and improving community relations. The Oversight Committee became a permanent fixture, and the department was forced to reckon with its past mistakes. Ryan found himself at the center of it all, not just as an officer, but as a symbol of the change that was possible when people stood up and demanded better. His public profile had grown, and while he still faced resistance from some within the department, he had earned the respect of many who saw him as a leader committed to justice. The climax of his journey came not with a single dramatic moment, but with the realization that the fight for reform was ongoing. There would always be setbacks, always be people who resisted change. But there would also be victories small and large that moved the needle toward justice. One evening, Ryan stood before a gathering of community members, officers, and city officials. He had been asked to give a speech about the progress that had been made. And as he looked out at the crowd, he felt the weight of the journey behind him. "This has never been just about one man or one incident," Ryan began, his voice strong and steady. "This has been about all of us, about what kind of society we want to live in. A society where everyone is treated with respect, where the law protects everyone equally, and where justice is more than just a word." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We've made progress, but there's still a long way to go. Real change takes time. It takes commitment. But I believe that together we can build something better. We can build a future where every person, regardless of their race, their background, or their position can feel safe and respected. The crowd erupted into applause, but Ryan remained focused. He knew the work wasn't done. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of optimism that the fight for justice was one they could win. The next morning, Ryan and Jordan met at the police academy, where Ryan had been asked to speak to a new class of recruits. As they stood outside the building, watching the young officers file in, Jordan smiled. "Look at you," Jordan said, nudging him. "The face of the future." Ryan shook his head, laughing. "I'm just trying to make sure these kids don't make the same mistakes we did." Jordan's smile faded slightly. "We've come a long way, but you're right. There's still a lot of work to do." Ryan nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. "There always will be." As they walked into the academy, Ryan felt a sense of purpose and resolve. The fight for justice wasn't over, but they were making progress. And as long as there were people willing to stand up and demand change, there was hope. The journey wasn't finished, but it was just beginning. 1 year after the public hearing that set the city on a course toward change, the police department, the community, and Ryan Carter's life looked drastically different. Reforms that had once seemed like distant dreams were now realities, though the work was far from finished. Ryan's office was quieter than usual that morning, a rare moment of calm amidst the ongoing efforts of reform and rebuilding. He had just finished reading the latest report from the Police Oversight Committee, detailing further improvements in officer training and community outreach programs. The city wasn't perfect, but it was on a path he could finally feel proud of. Ryan glanced at a framed photo on his desk, one taken at last month's Community Police Relations Summit. He stood in the center, surrounded by fellow officers, city leaders, and community activists, including Jordan Thompson, who had remained a constant ally. In the photo, they were all smiling, united by a shared vision for the future. Ryan allowed himself a small smile. They had come so far. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Jordan. "You ready for tonight? Big crowd expected." Ryan typed back quickly, "Of course. He'll be there." Tonight was the official launch of their joint initiative, Bridges of Justice, a program that connected law enforcement with community leaders to foster better communication and trust. It was the culmination of everything they had worked for over the past year, an idea born from pain and transformed into hope. By the time Ryan arrived at the event hall that evening, the place was buzzing with energy. The crowd was diverse police officers, community organizers, students, and families. Everyone had gathered to celebrate the progress they had made together, and the excitement was palpable. Ryan scanned the room, spotting Jordan deep in conversation with Samantha Lewis, the attorney who had been instrumental in pushing their case through the legal system. Samantha saw Ryan and waved him over. "Here he is, the man of the hour," Samantha teased as Ryan approached. "I think you're giving me too much credit," Ryan replied with a grin. This was a team effort. Jordan clapped Ryan on the back. "You still need to get used to this, man. You're the face of this movement now." Ryan shook his head. "No, I'm just one part of it. It takes all of us." Samantha smiled. "And that's exactly why this program is going to work. Because it's built on the idea that we're stronger together." As the crowd settled into their seats, Ryan took a moment to reflect on how far they had come. The journey had been long and difficult, but standing here tonight, he knew they had made real progress. It wasn't just about new policies or training programs. It was about changing mindsets, building trust, and creating a future where people could coexist without fear or suspicion. When it was time for Ryan to address the crowd, he felt the familiar flutter of nerves in his stomach. He had given countless speeches over the past year, but this one felt different. It wasn't about fighting back against injustice. It was about building something new. He stepped up to the podium, the bright lights shining down on him as the crowd quieted. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Ryan began, his voice clear and steady. "A year ago, I stood in front of a room much like this one and spoke about the need for change. I talked about the injustice I faced and the injustices so many others have faced. But tonight, I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about hope." He paused, looking out at the faces in the audience. "This past year has taught me many things," he continued. "I've learned that change isn't easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. But I've also learned that when people come together, when they put aside their differences and work toward a common goal, they can accomplish incredible things." He gestured toward the crowd. "Look around you. This is what progress looks like. It's police officers working hand in hand with community leaders. It's activists and city officials sitting at the same table. It's young people who once feared the police, now feeling like they have a voice in shaping the future." The audience murmured in agreement, the energy in the room rising. "We still have a long way to go," Ryan admitted. "But tonight, we celebrate how far we've come. And I believe that if we keep working together, if we keep listening to each other, we can create a future where justice isn't just a concept, it's a reality for everyone." The crowd erupted into applause, and Ryan stepped back from the podium, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. For the first time in a long time, he felt like they were truly on the right path. After the speeches and presentations were finished, Ryan mingled with the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging stories with both familiar faces and new ones. He could feel the optimism in the air, the sense that they were building something that would last. Jordan found him near the back of the room, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "You did good, man," he said, handing one of the glasses to Ryan. Ryan clinked his glass against Jordan's. "We did good." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the crowd. Jordan turned to him, his expression thoughtful. "You know, when we first started this, I wasn't sure we'd get here." Ryan nodded. "Me neither, but we did." Jordan smiled. "Yeah, and I think we're just getting started." Ryan raised his glass. "To the future, then." Jordan lifted his glass in return. "To the future." Later that night, Ryan returned home, tired but content. As he sat on his porch, looking out at the quiet street, he reflected on how much had changed in just a year. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time, he felt like he had truly found his purpose. Ryan had always believed in justice. It was why he became a police officer in the first place. But over the past year, he had learned that justice wasn't just about enforcing the law, it was about ensuring fairness, compassion, and accountability. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. And it was about using his position to create real, lasting change. He thought about the young recruits he had spoken to at the academy, about the community members who had come together to demand better, and about the officers who had joined him in his fight for reform. They were the future, the ones who would carry this work forward long after he was gone. As Ryan leaned back in his chair, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. The fight for justice wasn't over, but it was in good hands. And as long as there were people willing to stand up and fight for what was right, there was hope. Several years had passed since that pivotal year of reform, and the city's landscape had transformed significantly. The police department, once fraught with incidents of racial profiling and unchecked power, now served as a national example of how accountability and community collaboration could create a better future. There were still challenges, as there always would be, but the culture had shifted, and Ryan Carter had played a key role in that change. Now, in his early 40s, Ryan had been promoted to Deputy Chief of Police, a position that put him in charge of overseeing training and community relations, 2 areas that had seen the most growth since the reforms had begun. His leadership and dedication were recognized both within and outside the department. And though the journey had not been easy, Ryan felt proud of what they had accomplished. As Ryan sat in his office one sunny afternoon, reviewing the latest reports on the department's progress, he received a visitor. Deputy Chief Carter, a young voice called from the door. Ryan looked up to see Officer Naomi Green, one of the newest recruits. She had graduated from the police academy only a few months earlier, and Ryan had taken notice of her sharp instincts and strong moral compass. She reminded him of himself when he had first joined the force, full of hope and ready to make a difference. "Come in, Officer Green," Ryan said with a smile. Naomi entered the office holding a small notebook. She looked nervous but determined, and Ryan appreciated her courage. "I just wanted to say thank you, sir," she began, "for everything you've done. For people like me. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the changes you made." Ryan leaned back in his chair, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Thank you, officer. But I didn't do it alone. And now it's up to officers like you to keep it going." Naomi nodded, her expression serious. "I will, sir. I promise." As she left his office, Ryan felt a sense of pride, seeing the next generation of officers take up the mantle of justice and fairness reassured him that the department's future was in good hands. People like Naomi Green were proof that the reforms were making a real difference, that the work he and Jordan had started would continue to grow and evolve long after they were gone. Across town, Jordan Thompson was continuing his own fight for justice this time, on a much larger stage. Jordan's career as a defense attorney had skyrocketed in the years following the reforms, and he had become a national figure in the ongoing struggle for police reform and civil rights. His work had taken him to Washington, D.C., where he testified before Congress, advocating for federal legislation that would create nationwide standards for police accountability and racial justice. On this particular day, Jordan found himself walking the halls of the Capitol, preparing to meet with a group of senators to discuss the upcoming vote on the National Policing Standards Act. The bill had been years in the making, and Jordan had been one of its most vocal supporters. As he approached the meeting room, Jordan couldn't help but think back to where it all started. He thought of that fateful night when he and Ryan had been pulled over for no reason. It had been a turning point, not just for the city but for both of their lives. And now, the changes they had fought for were spreading across the country. The meeting went well. Jordan's passion and eloquence had won over key lawmakers, and the bill was gaining momentum. But he knew the fight was far from over. Change on this scale was slow, and there were powerful forces pushing back against it. But Jordan wasn't afraid of a fight. He never had been. As he left the Capitol that afternoon, he pulled out his phone and called Ryan. "Hey man," Jordan said when Ryan picked up. "Guess what? The bill's moving forward. We're closer than ever." Ryan's voice on the other end was filled with excitement. "That's amazing, Jordan. I knew you'd make it happen." Jordan chuckled. "Well, it's not done yet, but we're getting there. Just wanted to share the good news." "I'm proud of you, man," Ryan said. "You've been pushing for this from the start." "Yeah, well, someone's got to keep you on your toes," Jordan teased. They talked for a few more minutes before Jordan hung up, feeling a renewed sense of determination. The work was hard, and the road was long, but he knew they were making progress. And that was what mattered. As the years passed, the Bridges of Justice initiative grew beyond anyone's expectations. What had started as a local effort to repair the relationship between law enforcement and the community had become a model for cities across the nation. Ryan and Jordan continued to collaborate, finding new ways to strengthen the bonds between officers and the people they served. One of the most successful programs to come out of the initiative was the Community Police Partnership Forum, where citizens and officers met regularly to discuss issues, share concerns, and work together on solutions. The forum created a space for honest dialogue, and it helped to humanize both sides in a way that hadn't been done before. Ryan was particularly proud of the program because it had changed the way officers interacted with the communities they patrolled. Instead of being seen as enforcers, they were becoming protectors and partners, building trust that had been eroded for so long. On one warm summer evening, Ryan attended one of the partnership meetings in a neighborhood that had once been rife with tension between residents and police. Now the atmosphere was friendly, with officers and community members sitting together in small groups, sharing stories and listening to one another. Ryan stood at the edge of the room, watching with a sense of satisfaction. This was what real change looked like: people coming together, finding common ground, and building a future that worked for everyone. Jordan arrived late, sliding into the seat next to Ryan. "Looks like things are going well," he said, surveying the room. "Better than I ever expected," Ryan replied, his voice filled with quiet pride. Jordan grinned. "Told you we could change the world." Ryan chuckled. "One step at a time." The following year, Ryan was invited to speak at a national conference on police reform. Law enforcement leaders, policymakers, and activists from all over the country had gathered to share ideas and discuss the future of policing. Ryan's reputation as a reformer had grown, and his insights were in high demand. As he stood on the stage, Addressing the audience, Ryan reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He spoke about the challenges they had faced, the resistance they had encountered, and the progress they had made. But more than anything, he spoke about the need for continued vigilance. Reform is not a destination, Ryan said, his voice carrying across the room. It's a process. It's something we have to work at every day. Because the moment we stop pushing, the moment we become complacent, that's when things go backward. He paused, letting his words sink in. We've made incredible strides in the past few years, but there is still work to be done. And that work doesn't just fall on the shoulders of police officers or activists, it falls on all of us. We all have a role to play in making our society safer, fairer, and more just. The room erupted into applause, and Ryan felt a sense of fulfillment. This was the path he was meant to be on, and as long as he could, he would keep fighting for a better future. Years later, Ryan Carter would look back on his career and see it not just as a series of promotions or achievements, but as a journey toward justice. He would see the faces of the young officers he had mentored, like Naomi Green, who would go on to lead the next generation of law enforcement with integrity and compassion. He would remember the partnerships forged between police and the community, and the bridges built over once impassable divides. And he would know that while the work was never truly done, the legacy of what they had built would endure. One day, as Ryan sat on his porch, watching the sun set over the city, he received a call from Jordan, who had just returned from a speaking engagement in New York. "Ryan," Jordan said, his voice warm with pride. "We did it. The National Policing Standards Act just passed." Ryan smiled, a deep sense of accomplishment washing over him. "I always knew we would." They talked for a few minutes, reminiscing about the journey they had shared before Jordan had to go. As Ryan hung up the phone, he leaned back in his chair, feeling a sense of peace. The fight for justice would continue, and there would always be challenges. But he and Jordan had made their mark. They had helped to create a better world one step at a time. And that, he knew, was more than enough. Though the reforms Ryan and Jordan had championed had taken root, life, as always, presented new challenges. The city continued to evolve, and with it came unforeseen hurdles. One of the most pressing issues was the rise in tensions around technological surveillance and how it was being used by law enforcement. Facial recognition technology, predictive policing software, and increased digital monitoring had become tools in the department's arsenal, but they were also raising ethical questions about privacy and potential misuse. Ryan, now well-versed in navigating the complexities of law enforcement reform, found himself at the center of this debate. On one hand, the new technology was helping to reduce crime in high-risk areas. On the other hand, there were serious concerns about how it disproportionately affected communities of color. Some citizens felt like they were being over-policed in their own neighborhoods, and the debate about privacy rights versus public safety had taken center stage. Sitting in a city council meeting one afternoon, Ryan listened carefully as community members voiced their concerns. Many spoke about how they felt uncomfortable knowing that their every move might be tracked or analyzed by technology they didn't fully understand. Civil liberties groups were pushing back hard against the implementation of these tools, and Jordan, ever the advocate for justice, was working on a legal challenge to curb their use. Ryan, caught in the middle, knew the issue wasn't black and white. Technology, when used responsibly, could be a powerful ally in law enforcement. But he also understood that without careful oversight and clear guidelines, it could easily be abused, further eroding the fragile trust they had worked so hard to build. After the meeting, Ryan was approached by Councilwoman Elena Reyes, a strong voice in favor of civil rights and an outspoken opponent of unchecked surveillance. "Deputy Chief Carter," she greeted him warmly. "What did you think of what you heard today?" Ryan paused before responding. "I think people are right to be concerned. We need to find a balance between protecting public safety and respecting individual privacy. But that's easier said than done." Councilwoman Reyes nodded thoughtfully. "I appreciate your honesty. I think we'll need leaders like you to help navigate this. It's not going away." Ryan knew she was right. As he walked out of City Hall that evening, He felt the weight of the new challenge pressing on him. How could they continue to protect the city while ensuring they didn't sacrifice the very rights they were sworn to uphold? A few days later, Ryan met with Jordan at a coffee shop downtown. Jordan had been busy working on a lawsuit challenging the use of facial recognition technology in public spaces, and he wanted Ryan's input. "Look, I get that the department needs tools to do their job," Jordan said as he stirred his coffee. "But this technology is being disproportionately used in certain neighborhoods. People shouldn't feel like they're living under constant surveillance just because they live in a particular part of town." Ryan nodded, sipping his own coffee. "I agree with you. I've seen the data. It's clear that there's an over-reliance on these tools in communities of color. But the tech isn't the problem by itself, it's how we're using it. We need stronger guidelines." Jordan leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Then help me. Join this fight. You've got the influence inside the department to make sure these tools are used fairly, or not used at all if they're causing more harm than good." Ryan exhaled, thinking it over. He had always believed in using every tool available to prevent crime, but Jordan was right. If they weren't careful, this technology could undermine everything they had fought to build. "I'll talk to the chief," Ryan said finally. "We need to make sure this is being done the right way. We can't afford to lose the trust we've gained." Jordan nodded, satisfied for now. "We're on the same page then. Let me know how it goes." In the months that followed, Ryan spearheaded a new task force within the department aimed at ensuring the responsible use of technology in policing. The Ethical Policing Technology Initiative (EPTI) was designed to oversee how new tools were implemented, making sure they adhered to strict privacy standards and weren't being used in a discriminatory manner. Ryan worked closely with civil liberties groups, tech experts, and community leaders to develop guidelines that ensured transparency and accountability. Officers were required to undergo specialized training on how to use these tools ethically, and new oversight measures were put in place to monitor their deployment. The program wasn't without its critics. Some officers complained that the new rules made their jobs harder, while certain tech companies pushed back against what they saw as unnecessary restrictions. But Ryan stood firm, knowing that without proper oversight, the technology could do more harm than good. During one particularly tense department meeting, an officer raised his hand, frustration evident in his voice. "With all due respect, Deputy Chief," he began, "why are we handcuffing ourselves? This technology can help us catch criminals faster. Why put so many restrictions on it?" Ryan met the officer's gaze, understanding the concern but remaining resolute. "Because our job isn't just to catch criminals," he said. "Our job is to protect the people, and that means protecting their rights too. If we start sacrificing privacy and civil liberties in the name of efficiency, then we're not doing our jobs. We're just cutting corners." The room was silent for a moment, and Ryan could see the wheels turning in the officer's mind. It was a tough balancing act, but Ryan knew it was necessary. The future of policing wasn't about brute force or unchecked surveillance. It was about thoughtful, ethical approaches that respected the people they served. 2 years later, the Ethical Policing Technology Initiative had become a model for departments across the country. Ryan had been invited to speak at several national conferences, sharing the lessons they had learned about balancing public safety with civil liberties. The success of the initiative had solidified his reputation as a forward-thinking leader in law enforcement reform. Jordan, too, had continued his advocacy work, pushing for nationwide adoption of similar standards. The two men, despite their different approaches, remained close friends and collaborators, each pushing the other to do better. One evening, after a long day, Ryan received a message from Jordan: "Dinner at my place." When Ryan arrived, Jordan was already grilling steaks on the back porch. The smell of sizzling meat filled the air as they sat down to catch up. "You know, I never thought we'd be here," Jordan said as they ate. "When we started all this, I didn't think we'd actually get to a point where the system would listen to us." Ryan smiled. "I think we both underestimated the power of persistence." Jordan laughed. "You're right about that. But we're not done yet, are we?" "No," Ryan said, his tone serious. "We're not. But we're making progress." They clinked their beer bottles together, a silent toast to the years of hard work and the victories they had earned. The road had been long and filled with obstacles, but they had made a difference one step at a time. As the sun set over the city, casting a warm glow over the skyline, Ryan and Jordan sat in comfortable silence, watching the world they had helped shape. The challenges they had faced, the battles they had fought, had all been worth it. They had built something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. Ryan couldn't help but think about the young officers coming up through the ranks, the ones who would carry on the work he had started. Officers like Naomi Green, who now led a unit focused on community engagement, were the future of policing. They represented a new generation that believed in fairness, justice, and the importance of doing things the right way. "I think the future's in good hands," Ryan said, more to himself than to Jordan. Jordan looked over at him, his expression thoughtful. "Yeah, I think it is." The two men sat back, content in the knowledge that while their work was never truly done, they had laid a foundation that would stand the test of time. And as long as there were people willing to stand up for what was right, there would always be hope for a better, more just world. A few more years passed, and Ryan Carter's career had reached heights he never imagined when he first joined the force. Now, as the chief of police, Ryan was responsible not only for the reforms that had already taken place, but also for leading the department through new social, technological, and ethical challenges. His success as a reformer had made him a widely respected figure, but it had also placed him under intense scrutiny. Every move he made, every decision he authorized, was dissected by the media and the public. The new debate consuming the city was centered around the rise in community-led safety initiatives. Many neighborhoods, particularly those that had experienced tense relations with the police in the past, were advocating for more localized, community-based public safety programs. These initiatives emphasized conflict resolution, mental health intervention, and restorative justice over traditional policing methods. Ryan understood the community's desire to have a more direct role in keeping their neighborhoods safe. After all, much of the progress they had made over the years was due to increased collaboration between the police and the public. But there were concerns within the department about the implications of scaling back traditional policing in favor of untested community models. One afternoon, as Ryan sat reviewing proposals for community-led initiatives, his deputy, Lieutenant Denise Martin, walked into his office. Denise had been one of Ryan's strongest allies during the reform years, helping him navigate the pushback from the old guard while building support among the rank-and-file officers. "Chief, you've seen the latest push from the city council, right?" Denise asked, a hint of concern in her voice. Ryan nodded, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Yeah, I've been going over it. Community Safety Initiative, they're calling it. They want to divert some funding from the police budget to support it." Denise frowned. "I get where they're coming from, but are they really ready for this? We're talking about removing traditional law enforcement presence in some of the most at-risk neighborhoods. Are we setting them up to fail?" Ryan leaned back in his chair, thinking carefully before responding. "I don't think we should look at it as us versus them. The goal is the same: keeping people safe. The way we've done things isn't the only way to do it. But if we're going to make this work, we need to be partners in the process." Denise nodded, her expression softening. "You think we can pull that off?" Ryan smiled slightly. "We've done harder things." A few days later, Ryan met with Councilwoman Elena Reyes, one of the main architects of the Community Safety Initiative. The two had worked together closely on previous reforms, but this new initiative was pushing them into uncharted territory. Still, Ryan was determined to keep the lines of communication open. Chief Carter, Councilwoman Reyes, greeted him warmly as they sat down in her office. "Thank you for taking the time. I know this isn't an easy conversation." Ryan smiled. "That's why we're here, to have the hard conversations. We both want the same thing: safer communities." Reyes nodded, her tone more serious now. "Exactly. But we believe that safety doesn't always have to come from a police presence. These community programs have been shown to reduce violence and increase trust between residents. We want to give people the tools to resolve conflicts without always having to rely on law enforcement. Ryan took a deep breath. I understand that, and I think there's a lot of potential here. But we also need to make sure that when people call for help, they get the response they need. There are situations where trained law enforcement is necessary, when violence escalates or when people's lives are at risk. We can't ignore that reality. Reyes leaned forward, her eyes thoughtful. That's why we need your help. We're not talking about eliminating police presence, we're talking about complementing it. Working together with the community instead of always being the first line of defense. Ryan nodded. I'm open to that. Let's figure out how we can build this partnership. But we need clear guidelines on when the police should step in and when the community can handle things on their own. We also need to make sure that officers aren't feeling like they're being sidelined. If we're going to shift some of the responsibility, we need to bring everyone to the table. Reyes smiled. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear. Over the next few months, the Community Safety Initiative took shape. Ryan and his team worked closely with the City Council and community leaders to design a pilot program that would test the new model in several neighborhoods. The initiative focused on training community members in conflict resolution, mental health first aid, and de-escalation tactics, while keeping a close line of communication with the police for situations that required their involvement. Jordan, ever the advocate for grassroots solutions, was thrilled with the progress. This is exactly what we've been talking about for years, Jordan said one evening over dinner with Ryan. Empowering the community to take ownership of their own safety. If this works, it could be a game changer. Ryan nodded, though he remained cautious. I want it to work as much as you do. But we have to be prepared for things to go wrong, too. If the community doesn't feel supported, or if the police feel like they're being cut out of the process, this could backfire. Jordan raised his glass. That's why we have you keeping everyone on the same page. Ryan chuckled, clinking his glass against Jordan's. Let's hope it's enough. As the program rolled out, there were successes and setbacks. In some neighborhoods, the community-led safety efforts resulted in a noticeable decrease in calls for police intervention. People began resolving disputes among themselves, and trust between residents and law enforcement improved. But in other areas, old tensions resurfaced. Some officers felt their authority was being undermined, while certain residents still feared police involvement, leading to hesitations in calling for help when it was really needed. Ryan worked tirelessly to address these issues, meeting with officers and community leaders, adjusting the program as needed. He knew this was part of the growing pains of any new initiative, but he also knew they couldn't afford to let the early successes slip away. The true test of the Community Safety Initiative came one night when a major confrontation erupted between two rival groups in one of the pilot neighborhoods. The conflict had escalated quickly, with rumors of violence spreading through social media. Normally, the police would have responded immediately, but this time, the community leaders who had been trained through the initiative decided to step in first. Ryan and his team were on standby, monitoring the situation closely. He had already instructed the officers to be ready to intervene if things got out of hand. But he was hoping that the community could de-escalate the situation without the need for force. For hours, tensions ran high as the trained mediators worked to calm both sides. The situation was touch and go, but just as things seemed like they were about to erupt into violence, a breakthrough happened. The leaders of both groups agreed to meet, with the mediators acting as go-betweens, and after a tense negotiation, they reached a resolution without a single arrest or injury. When Ryan received the call that the situation had been resolved peacefully, he felt a wave of relief wash over him. "We did it," Denise said, her voice filled with awe as she stood beside Ryan in the precinct's command center. Ryan nodded, his expression serious. "The community did it. We were there to back them up, but they handled it on their own." Jordan called Ryan that night, excited about the news. "This is huge, man, proof that this model works. People are going to take notice." Ryan smiled but remained grounded. "It's a big step, but we have to stay focused. This isn't a one-time thing. We need to keep refining the process, making sure that both the community and the police are working together." Months later, the success of the pilot program had attracted national attention. Cities across the country were interested in replicating the model, and Ryan was once again at the forefront of a new wave of reform. This time, the focus wasn't just on how police could change, but on how entire communities could take ownership of their safety while still collaborating with law enforcement. Jordan, as always, remained by Ryan's side, helping to push the legal framework for these initiatives across the country. The two friends had come a long way from that fateful night they had been pulled over. Their partnership had transformed the city and was now shaping the future of public safety nationwide. As Ryan sat in his office preparing for yet another interview with a national news outlet about the program's success, he couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. The road hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead. But they had built something lasting, something that would change lives for generations to come. Looking out the window at the city he had dedicated his life to, Ryan smiled. The work was never done, but for the first time, he felt truly optimistic about the future. They had started with a fight for justice, but now they were building a future of hope, partnership, and community-led safety. And as long as people were willing to work together, Ryan knew that anything was possible. A few years had passed since the Community Safety Initiative had been fully implemented across the city. The initiative had matured, becoming an example of how community and law enforcement could work together in harmony without one undermining the other. While there were still challenges, the overwhelming success had drawn attention from policymakers, activists, and law enforcement agencies across the country. Ryan Carter, now nearing retirement age, was in a reflective mood. After decades of service, he knew his time as the city's police chief was coming to an end. And while he looked forward to stepping back from the pressures of the job, he also felt the weight of leaving behind a legacy. Jordan, meanwhile, had taken his advocacy work to a national level. He was now leading efforts to pass federal legislation aimed at reshaping policing standards across the United States. They were both busy men, but their friendship remained as strong as ever. One evening, as Ryan sat at his kitchen table going over the plans for his final year in office, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Jordan Need to talk. "Big news! Let's meet tomorrow." Ryan smiled to himself. Jordan always had big news. Over the years, they had shared so many victories, setbacks, and countless moments of celebration and frustration. But it was their shared vision that had kept them moving forward. The next day, Ryan met Jordan at a small diner they used to frequent in their early days as young professionals. It felt nostalgic, sitting in the same booth where they had once dreamed of making a difference. Now, years later, they had done more than dream, they had transformed their city. "All right, Jordan, what's this big news?" Ryan asked as he settled into the booth. Jordan leaned forward, his eyes bright with excitement. "I've been talking with some of the top people in Washington. They want to take what we've done here with the Community Safety Initiative and turn it into a national pilot program. It'll be the first time this kind of community-driven public safety model has been tested on such a large scale." Ryan sat back, absorbing the news. "National pilot program? That's huge. What's the plan?" Jordan nodded enthusiastically. "They're looking for cities willing to try it. We'd take the model we built and expand it, tweaking it based on the unique needs of different communities. They want to bring me on as a national advisor, but more importantly, they want your input." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "My input? I'm about to retire, Jordan. I'm not sure. I'm the guy for this." Jordan shook his head, a grin spreading across his face. "You're exactly the guy for this. You've seen this work on the ground. You've lived it. And the fact that you've been in law enforcement gives you the credibility to convince other departments that this isn't just some idealistic dream, it's real, and it works." Ryan rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "It's a big ask. I've spent my entire career in this city. I'm not sure I'm ready for something on that scale." Jordan leaned in, his voice quieter now. "I know you're ready to step back, but think about it. This could be the final piece of the puzzle scaling this idea across the country. You could retire knowing that what we built here is making an impact everywhere. Just give it some thought." Ryan didn't respond immediately, but he knew Jordan had a point. The work they had started in their city had the potential to be something even greater. But after years of leading a department, Ryan wasn't sure if he had the energy for another national fight. "You'll think about it," Ryan said finally, his tone cautious. Jordan smiled. "That's all I'm asking." As Ryan approached the end of his tenure as police chief, he began preparing his department for the transition. He had mentored several officers who were strong candidates to succeed him, including Lieutenant Denise Martin, who had proven herself to be a capable leader and a dedicated advocate for the community first approach they had built. One afternoon, Ryan called Denise into his office. "Denise, you've been one of the strongest leaders in this department for years," Ryan said, looking across his desk at her. "I've been thinking a lot about the future, and I believe you're ready to take the reins." Denise's eyes widened slightly, though she had suspected this moment was coming. "Chief, that means a lot. I've learned so much from you, and I believe in what we've built together. But I know there's still so much more to do." Ryan nodded, his face thoughtful. "That's exactly why I know you're the right person for this. You've always been driven by the same things that pushed me: justice, fairness, and a commitment to serving the people. This department needs someone like you to keep it moving forward." Denise sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Ryan's words settling on her shoulders. "Thank you, Chief. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Ryan said, his voice filled with quiet confidence. "And remember, you're not doing this alone. Lean on your team, and don't be afraid to keep pushing for change, even when it's hard." As Denise left the office, Ryan felt a sense of peace. The future of the department was in good hands. It was time for him to step back and let the next generation lead. With his retirement officially announced, Ryan took a few weeks to reflect on Jordan's proposal. The idea of taking the community safety initiative to a national level intrigued him, but he was also ready for a quieter life after years of public service. He spent more time with his family, enjoying the slower pace, but the thought of leaving the work behind nagged at him. One evening, Ryan found himself sitting on his back porch, the sun setting over the city skyline. The phone buzzed, and he saw a message from Jordan. "Still waiting on you, old man." "Time's ticking." Ryan chuckled to himself, shaking his head. Jordan never gave up on a fight. That night, Ryan made his decision. He wasn't ready to walk away from it all just yet. The work they had started was too important, and if there was a chance to make a lasting impact on a national scale, he wanted to be a part of it. The next morning, Ryan called Jordan. "All right, I'm in. Let's do this." Jordan's voice was filled with triumph. "I knew you couldn't resist. This is going to be big, Ryan. We're about to change the game." With the decision made, Ryan found himself in Washington, D.C., meeting with lawmakers, community leaders, and law enforcement officials from across the country. The national pilot program was being rolled out in 10 major cities, and Ryan was instrumental in helping to shape its implementation. His experience in building the initiative from the ground up gave him a unique perspective, and his input was invaluable as they adapted the program to fit the specific needs of different communities. Jordan, as always, was right there with him, leading the charge from the legal side and ensuring that the program stayed true to its original goals of fairness, justice, and community empowerment. As the months passed, Ryan found himself energized by the work. He had thought he was ready for retirement, but this new mission gave him a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges were immense, but so were the rewards.
He watched his communities begin to embrace the new model as officers and residents, and as the seeds of change spread from city to city.
2 years into the national pilot program, the results were undeniable. The Community Safety Initiative had reduced violent incidents, built stronger bonds between law enforcement and residents, and empowered communities to take control of their own safety. The program was hailed as a success, and plans were already underway to expand it to even more cities. Ryan, now in his mid-60s, knew it was finally time to step back for good. His work was done. He had helped lay the foundation for a new era of policing and community collaboration, and he had no doubt that the leaders who followed would continue to build on that legacy. As he stood on the steps of the Capitol, Watching the latest round of national reforms being signed into law, Ryan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had spent his life fighting for justice, for fairness, and for a better future. And now that future was being realized. Jordan stood beside him, grinning. "Well, old man, we did it." Ryan smiled, his eyes reflecting both pride and relief. "Yeah, we did." They stood there together, watching the crowds below, knowing that their fight had been worth it. The road had been long, the challenges immense, but they had built something lasting, something that would shape the future for generations to come. And in that moment, Ryan knew that while his journey as a public servant was over, his legacy of justice, reform, and hope would live on. Ryan Carter had officially retired from his role as chief of police and had successfully completed his work on the National Pilot Program. Now, standing on the balcony of his home in Denver, he gazed out over the city that had shaped his life. After decades of service, he was finally stepping away from the day-to-day grind of law enforcement. But it didn't feel like the end. In many ways, it felt like a new beginning. Without the constant pressures of his old position, Ryan found himself reconnecting with old hobbies and passions that he hadn't had time for in years. He spent more time with his family, his wife Elena, and their two grown children, Tyler and Sophia. The past few years had been especially hard on them with Ryan's intense focus on work, and now he wanted to make up for lost time. One sunny afternoon, Ryan and Elena took a walk through the park, something they hadn't done in what felt like ages. The air was crisp, the leaves falling gently around them, and Ryan felt a sense of peace that he hadn't experienced in years. "You finally have time to slow down," Elena said with a smile as they strolled along the path. Ryan nodded. "It feels strange, but it's nice. I think I forgot what it was like to just be present." Elena squeezed his hand. "You've earned it, but I have a feeling you're not done yet." Ryan smiled, knowing she was right. Even in retirement, his mind still buzzed with thoughts about how he could continue making a difference. But this time, he would do it on his terms, without the constant demands of his old job weighing him down. A few months into his retirement, Ryan was approached by a local university to teach a course on ethical leadership and policing reform. The idea intrigued him. He had spent years putting these principles into practice, but now he had the opportunity to pass that knowledge on to the next generation of leaders. The thought of stepping into a classroom full of eager students, young people, who would one day be responsible for shaping the future of law enforcement, gave Ryan a renewed sense of purpose. He accepted the offer and began preparing for the course. On his first day at the university, Ryan felt a twinge of nervousness as he walked into the lecture hall. The students sat quietly, some of them looking excited, others curious, all waiting for the former police chief who had gained national recognition for his reforms. "Good afternoon," Ryan began, standing at the front of the class. "My name is Ryan Carter, and am here to talk to you about the future of policing." He paused, scanning the room before continuing. "But before we talk about the future, we need to understand the past, the mistakes, the challenges, and the moments when we didn't get it right. Because if we don't learn from those moments, we'll be doomed to repeat them." The room was silent as Ryan spoke, but he could feel the students' attention. Their interest piqued. Over the course of the semester, Ryan shared not just the victories he'd had in his career, but the hard lessons he had learned along the way. He emphasized the importance of empathy, listening, and above all, the responsibility that comes with the badge. Teaching gave Ryan a new outlet for his energy and passion. It wasn't the adrenaline-filled, high-stakes work of policing, but it was just as important. These students were the future, and he was determined to equip them with the tools they needed to lead with integrity. While Ryan was settling into his new role as an educator, Jordan Thompson's star continued to rise. His work on the national level had gained him a reputation as one of the most respected voices in the fight for justice reform. Jordan had helped pass landmark legislation that put ethical limits on the use of surveillance technology, created national standards for police accountability, and expanded community-led safety programs across the country. One afternoon, Jordan called Ryan from his office in Washington, D.C. and with some unexpected news. "Ryan, guess what?" Jordan said, his voice buzzing with excitement. "They want me to run for office." Ryan chuckled. "Who's they? And what office are we talking about here?" Jordan laughed. "A group of people who've been following my work think I should run for Congress. They want me to take this fight from the courtroom to the Capitol." Ryan wasn't entirely surprised. Jordan had always been a fighter, and he had the kind of charisma and conviction that made him a natural leader. "I can't say I didn't see this coming." "Are you thinking about it?" "I am," Jordan admitted. "It's a huge responsibility, but I've been thinking about how much more we could accomplish with the right people in power. If I can push for change at the highest level, why not go for it?" Ryan nodded, though Jordan couldn't see it. "You've always said we need people inside the system to change it from within. This might be your chance to do just that." "I've been thinking the same thing," Jordan replied. "It's a big step, but I think it's the right one." As they talked, Ryan felt a deep sense of pride for his friend. Jordan had spent his life fighting for justice, and now he was on the verge of taking that fight to the national stage. The following year, Jordan launched his campaign for Congress. With his years of legal experience and his proven track record in reform, he quickly gained support from a wide range of voters. His platform focused on criminal justice reform, civil rights, and economic equality issues that had been central to his work for decades. Ryan, though retired, was actively involved in the campaign, offering advice and helping Jordan connect with key community leaders. He traveled with Jordan to campaign events, standing by his side as they continued to push for the changes they had always believed in. On the night of the election, Ryan sat in the campaign's headquarters, surrounded by Jordan's team, watching the results roll in. The energy in the room was electric, but Ryan remained calm, reflecting on everything they had accomplished together. When the final votes were tallied, it was official: Jordan had won the election. The room erupted into cheers, and Jordan was immediately swarmed by supporters and media. But as soon as he had a moment, Jordan made his way through the crowd to Ryan. "We did it, man," Jordan said, grinning from ear to ear. Ryan smiled, shaking his friend's hand before pulling him into a hug. "You did it! I'm proud of you." Jordan nodded, his expression turning serious for a moment. "None of this would have happened without you, Ryan. We've been in this together from the start." As the celebration continued, Ryan couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning of something even bigger. Jordan's election to Congress meant that the work they had started years ago, the fight for justice, fairness, and accountability, was now being carried forward on a national level. And while Ryan was stepping back, he knew that the movement would continue to grow, led by people like Jordan, who were ready to take the next steps. As Ryan watched Jordan deliver his victory speech later that night, he felt a sense of closure and fulfillment. The work they had done together had made a lasting impact, not just in their city, but across the country. They had faced countless obstacles, but through it all, they had never given up. Ryan's life was quieter now, but it was filled with meaning. His time teaching at the university continued to bring him joy, and the students he mentored were already starting to make waves in the fields of law enforcement, social justice, and community activism. His influence would live on through them, and through the work Jordan was doing on a national scale. In the end, Ryan realized that the fight for justice never truly ended. It was passed down from one generation to the next, evolving with each new challenge. But he took comfort in knowing that the work would continue long after he was gone. And as he looked toward the future, Ryan Carter was filled with hope that the lessons they had learned, the battles they had fought, and the progress they had made would lead to a world that was fairer, more just, and filled with opportunity for all. As the story draws to a close, we want to thank you for joining us on this powerful journey of justice, friendship, and change. If you enjoyed this story and want more thought-provoking content like this, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us continue sharing stories that inspire, challenge, and make a difference. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear where you're watching from and what impact this story had on you. Subscribe now for more impactful stories and content that makes you think. We value your feedback, so if you enjoyed this story, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community, and stay tuned for more stories that remind us all that no matter how hard things get, we are never truly alone.